Let's first start by talking about Ukraine, and we've seen a lot of cabinet shift happening here in recent days, a new prime minister picked as well. What does that tell you just about the broader strategy that Ukraine has as it continues kind of ramp up attacks on Russia?
Yeah, well, Zelensky throughout the entire war over the last 4 years has wanted to make sure he has the right people in the job. And he has had many moments throughout the last 4 years where he's decided to make switches either at the Ministry of Defense or as his chief national security advisor. And that's not entirely uncommon given the challenges that he's facing. What's interesting about the most recent decision to get rid of the Minister of Defense, very young one, is that it's triggering public protests. This was a Minister of Defense that had a big following. He was the guy that was going to continue Ukraine's evolution and innovate and allow the Ukrainian military to be the most technically savvy out there. But he ran into some issues with some of those older army generals. There was so much friction that I think Zelensky decided he needed to move on.
Talk about military strategy, and I think Ukraine has been rightly lauded for how it's pioneered a lot of new technology, and we're seeing them use longer range drones now to go to Moscow and St. Petersburg. What is your sense just of the contours of this war at this point? Does Ukraine have the upper hand as you see it?
It sure feels like it. I mean, I think Ukraine rightly is being portrayed as a winner right now. It doesn't mean that they're winning the war and they're taking back hundreds of kilometers of territory. That's not happening on the ground. But not only are they holding territory now and occasionally moving forward and pushing back on those Russian forces, they're producing a lot of their own kit. Not just drones, but full-on air defense systems. They just got a license to produce Patriot PAC-3 missiles. We'll see how that unfolds. I'm a little skeptical. We'll see. But also, as you noted, we've seen these long-range strikes deep into Russian territory that is waking up kind of the people of Russia to this war. In Moscow, in St. Petersburg, they're starting to understand that their country is at war in ways, frankly, I think they've kind of missed over the last 4 years. So it feels like we're seeing a shift. The momentum appears to be on Ukraine's side. The question is, can they sustain that? And will the U.S. pressure Russia to get back to the negotiating table to find some sort of resolution here?
You mentioned those Patriot missiles, and the announcement of that license being given to Ukraine took place at the NATO Summit in Ankara. And I'm curious, you as a former ambassador, how you watched all of that unfold. A very short summit this year, but it does seem like President Trump emerged from it quite positive about the alliance in a way that he hasn't been previously.
Yeah, that's right. It looked a little bit like the Hague Summit. It was abbreviated, kind of a social dinner that was, casual night before. Leaders could just have some time with one another. President had some time with President Erdogan. He likes Erdogan. That was a plus. And then the next day, a single session where they essentially reviewed how much progress they've made on defense spending. The president arrived quite unhappy, had a lot of grievances against particular allies. But at the end of the summit, he left talking about the love in the room. And the question always is, does that hold? And how will that play into the force posture decisions that are coming down the pike later this calendar year? And allies are hopeful that that kind of positive energy towards the alliance will prevent President Trump from doing anything rash when it comes to U.S. troops in Europe.
You have an abbreviated summit like this one, and it kind of limits what allies are able to talk about, and something that the U.S. has floated is this vision of NATO 3.0. What is it? Does it make sense to you? It sounds like it's NATO with the U.S. taking a kind of less of a vanguard role.
Yeah, it's hard because the phrase emerged in a speech, and I think the administration is still fleshing out what it means in practice. But essentially, you've got NATO at the creation to protect NATO territory from Soviet aggression. 2.0 could be after 9/11, the alliance decided to focus on counterterrorism, get engaged in a 20-year mission in Afghanistan. 3.0, I guess I would describe it as a bit of a coming home. home, focused on NATO territory again in the war on Ukraine, paired with Europe moving into a new role to take more responsibility for the security of Europe. How that plays out over time, we'll have to see. I mean, you've got U.S. disengagement and a push by Europeans to do more. The question is there a period of vulnerability in there that Putin could potentially take advantage of?
A proponent of this strategy has been Elbridge Colby, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and he recently also weighed on middle powers and kind of the coherent, the effort that Prime Minister Mark Carney and others have advocated for, kind of having them come together to kind of advocate for themselves. What did you make of the pushback that he offered on that point? He did it on social media, but effectively he said he doesn't think that there's really much cohesion to that group whatsoever, and it's a waste of time, fundamentally.
Yeah, I found that curious and a little bit, frankly, out of touch with the reality of what we're seeing. I mean, we had 2 European leaders write this piece in The Economist. You had the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Finland join forces and draft a piece that essentially said, because of the fact that the U.S.'s role in Europe is changing and evolving, and we're moving on from this kind of order that we all created after World War II, we're entering a new phase where smaller groups of countries will come together on specific topics, whether it's AI or China or something else, cybersecurity, and we'll work together in different configurations. Not everything will be at NATO, not everything will be at the European Union or the G7, but that's going to be the wave of the future. I found that rooted in fact. I also found it rooted in the understanding that the U.S. is disengaging and rebalancing its relationship. So when Bridge Colby came out and talked about the fact that this either is a waste of time or not happening, it just, to me, doesn't reflect the reality. Europe is worried about our unpredictability right now. They are not certain that we would show up in Europe if there was a crisis. And for that reason, they are looking at new models, and I don't think that necessarily has to be a bad thing.
How do you personally feel about that disengagement as you describe it? I mean, the consequences of that, of Europe, again, looking at us perhaps as a less reliable partner, and having to chart a path forward that doesn't include the U.S. in the way in which it has in the past?
Well, 2 things. One, I'm pleased that the Trump administration has moved the allies to 5% and everyone is spending more on defense. Those efforts have to be applauded. But the way in which this administration has treated its allies has created a lot of mistrust. The episode over Greenland has done lasting damage to the relationship. For the largest and most influential member of the alliance to go after the sovereign territory, even for a few months, of another NATO ally really sent a shock through the alliance. And I think we're now seeing the consequences of that play out in real time. So let's celebrate the defense spending, but I think let's be concerned. I'm concerned about how Europeans are looking at us and whether or not they think we're reliable.
You mentioned that spending, and I'm curious, as we've lived through many of these summits now, year by year, are we at a point now where we stop talking about that as much as we have? I know that there's kind of this sense going into these summits, President Trump's going to come, this is what he's going to harp on. Indeed, he did at this most recent summit in Turkey. Now that we've seen the elevation of those commitments, say for Spain, do you feel like we kind of can move past that and we can have more constructive conversations at summits in the future?
Well, I would hope so, because NATO does a lot other than focus on defense spending, and we will have to keep our foot on the gas and make sure that all countries are moving out and trying to meet the targets. But I would want to see the alliance do more on some of those gray zone challengers or hybrid challenges, things like cybersecurity or malign influence, coercion, cutting undersea cables, airspace violations. There's a lot of other work to be doing at the alliance. So yes, focus on the defense spending, make sure everybody's hitting the mark, but don't lose sight of all the other good work that's going on at the alliance.
Ambassador Smith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to speak with you.
Great to see you.